My name is Arthur Vance. I am 63 years old. At my daughter's rehearsal dinner in my own garden, I overheard her fiance call her a fat pig and call me a stupid old bull, laughing with his best friend about how he planned to marry her for access to $40 million in family money. I did not confront him that night. I walked back inside, raised my glass, and smiled at the very man who had just called my life's work a deficiency. Because at that moment, I decided to let him walk straight into a trap that would destroy everything he was trying to steal. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you are listening from. Now let me take you back to the daughter I raised and the version of trust I let a stranger nearly take from her without ever raising my voice. My daughter, Elena, is 31 years old, with her mother's gold brown eyes and my own mother's laugh, the kind that fills a room without asking permission first. She volunteers at a literacy center in the Bronx every Saturday, remembers birthdays other people forget, and once drove 2 hours through a snowstorm to bring soup to a friend with the flu. She is, without competition, the finest person I have ever known. I built Vance Group from nothing, loading freight trucks at Hunts Point Terminal at 4 in the morning for 11 years, missing Christmases, eating sandwiches in a delivery cab because I could not afford the diner on the corner. Every white hydrangea on that terrace, every stone in that study, every year of this life came from decades of choices that cost me things I cannot get back. Julian Cross entered Elena's life 18 months ago. Charming, articulate, exactly the kind of man who makes a room feel like it was waiting for him specifically. I watched him for 8 months at my dinner table, shaking my hand, looking me in the eye, all while carrying an opinion of me I would not learn the full weight of until the night before her wedding. At the rehearsal dinner, Julian stood and toasted me warmly in front of 60 guests, calling me a self-made man who built everything from scratch, including his taste, in a tone the room read as affectionate teasing. I smiled and raised my glass along with everyone else, holding the steady expression of 30 years spent at negotiating tables, letting a man believe he had succeeded in underestimating me. Stepping away from the terrace for a moment of quiet, I heard voices below the stone retaining wall. Julian and his friend Christian, believing themselves private. "She's a fat pig," Julian said, flat, casual, the way a man describes furniture he finds inconvenient. "But she's useful, and she's lonely enough to believe whatever I tell her." Then, about me, "He's a stupid old bull, spent his whole life loading boxes and thinks that makes him wise." I stood in the dark and let every word land completely. Christian pressed him about the money, and Julian confirmed it plainly. He had been patient for 18 months, letting me believe bringing him into the export business was my own idea, and he intended to marry Elena, keep her comfortable, and let her stay exactly where she needed to be, not knowing the difference between being loved and being managed. I walked back inside, found my wife Martha near the fireplace, and asked her to trust me completely and act perfectly normal for the rest of the evening. 33 years of marriage meant she read the shift in my face instantly and simply said, "Of course. Come tell Patricia about the renovations." Watching Julian return to Elena's side, his arm around her, her fingers touching his jaw with complete trust, I made a decision. The best trap he ever built would not look like a trap at all. It would look like an opportunity, exactly the kind of opening a man spends 18 months quietly engineering himself toward. Near the end of the evening, I invited Julian into my study, poured 2 glasses of 15-year Delamore Scotch, and told him I had been considering bringing in a managing partner for our export division, a $4 million standing inventory position, profit participation, decision-making authority. I watched his shoulders relax, watched him work hard to appear unhurried while accepting exactly the offer he had spent 18 months positioning himself to receive. I told Julian we would formalize everything after the honeymoon, sitting down properly with my longtime operations manager, Thomas Aldrich, a compact, precise man who has kept the operational core of my business honest for 16 years. Julian shook my hand at the door that night, firm and confident, telling me he was in, whatever I needed. I wish this had gone differently. I wish my daughter had found a man who loved her for exactly who she is, instead of one who bought her pastry specifically to keep her soft and grateful, treating her tenderness as a tool rather than a gift. But wishes do not undo 18 months of a plan built with this much patience and cruelty. The truth does. That night, after the last guests left and Elena had gone up to bed glowing with the happiness of a woman who had no idea what she had just touched with her own fingers, I called Thomas Aldridge before I allowed myself to sleep, needing him to understand exactly what was coming and exactly how carefully we would need to build the paperwork around it. Thomas arrived early the next morning, as he always does, notebook in hand, and I laid out everything I intended. A formal managing partner agreement for Julian, containing a clause neither he nor Christian would think to question, one requiring full financial disclosure, and a morality clause tied directly to any documented deception toward a family member, drafted specifically to be triggered by exactly the kind of conversation I had overheard the night before. Just past midnight, days later, once the agreement was fully drafted and a small recording device Thomas had quietly installed in my study confirmed every detail Julian had unknowingly repeated during our planning conversations, I signed off on the final version myself. 12:03 in the morning. I am 63 years old. I am, for the first time since that garden, no longer simply the man Julian believed he had already conquered across the city. Julian was almost certainly still celebrating his engagement, confident he had secured both a wife and a fortune through 18 months of careful patience. With no idea the very room he had accepted the partnership in contained the recording of him calling my daughter useful and lonely enough to manage. Weeks after the wedding, when Julian and Elena returned from their honeymoon, Thomas presented the formal partnership agreement exactly as promised, requiring Julian's signature on the morality and disclosure clause before any funds or authority transferred. Julian signed without reading closely. The same vanity that made him certain no one could ever see through him, walking him straight to the pen. That same week, I sat Elena down privately and played her a recording from that garden, every word, in Julian's own voice. I watched my daughter's face move through disbelief, grief, and finally a clarity I had been quietly protecting her toward for 18 months. She did not cry the way I expected. She went very still, then asked to see the partnership contract herself. Julian was informed the following day that the morality clause had been triggered, the partnership dissolved, and any further contact with Vance Group's business interests severed entirely. He looked at me across that same study, expecting the stupid old bull he had described in my own garden. He was not looking at that man. He never had been. I spent 30 years learning that the moment someone underestimates you completely is the exact moment you have the most room to move. I always thought that lesson belonged only in boardrooms. I understand now. It protects the people I love most, just as thoroughly. Julian's engagement to Elena ended within the month. The recording and contract clause standing as undeniable proof of exactly who he had always been. Thomas continues managing Vance Group's operations with the same quiet precision he always has. As for Elena, she has since returned to the literacy center on Saturdays with a steadiness in her that was not there before, and a clearer eye for the difference between being loved and being managed. I think about that garden every time I walk past those white hydrangeas now. And I think the quietest men in the room are often holding the entire outcome in their hands long before anyone else understands the game has already been decided. If you have ever let someone believe they had won so you could learn the whole truth first, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And if this one moved you, subscribe to Dad's Revenge Tales. There is more where this came from.